Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today I thought I would do another quarterly goals update. So I did one of these at the end of March, talking about how my goals have been going in the first 3 months of the year, and I thought I would now do one now that we are 6 months through the year. So at the beginning of this year / the very end of last year, I made a video on my reading goals for 2019 in which I set out quite a few things that I wanted to achieve over the course of the year, and then sort of as the year has gone on, I have added new other things to those goals. So quickly I will go through my kind of general goals and then I will move on to my glorious goals spreadsheet chart ticking off thing which I created back in January and which I talked about in my last quarterly reading goals update, which I'm really enjoying using so far. So my Goodreads goal for 2019 I set originally to 80 books with a personal goal of reading 100 books. So I work for a publisher, I work for the imprint Zaffa, which is part of Bonnier Books UK, so I read quite a lot of books for work which are unpublished submissions or unpublished books that are not going to be published for a little while, which I can't track on Goodreads, but obviously I do read and I keep a note of them myself. So I thought I would aim to read 80 books on Goodreads and then 100 books in my own time over the course of 2019. Since making that goal, I've actually upped my Goodreads goal to 100 books because it looked likely that I would reach that. And at this point in June, halfway through the year, Goodreads thinks I have read 76 books and I've actually read 100 books, which is a bit weird. That's quite a lot of books to have read by this point in the year. Also quite weird and very neat is that in January, February and March I read 50 books, and then in April, May and June I read 50 books, which again is weirdly neat, but there we go. So I guess the question now is, having completed my personal goal of how many books I want to read and being fairly certain I will reach 100 books on Goodreads, the question is, can I reach 150 books on Goodreads and 200 books of my personal goal? So yeah, we'll see how many books I read in 2019. It could be a lot. Another goal I had for 2019 was to read The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, which is a book that has been on my TBR the longest. I still haven't read it, but you know, this 6 months ago. Another of my goals was to read more poetry and short stories, which I haven't really been doing, but I think I'm just gonna cut this goal for 2019 now because I think I just don't own very many poetry and short story collections, and there's not very many short story collections in my local library. I am a member of the poetry library on the South Bank, but I used to work near there and I now work really far away from there, so it's less convenient for me to go and get poetry at the library, so I think I'm just gonna ignore that goal for the time being, and I probably won't mention it in the rest of my quarterly updates as we go on through this year. Another of my goals for 2019 was to read more contemporary fiction, which I'm definitely doing, both in terms of the fact that I'm reading a lot for work, which is obviously contemporary, and in general I am reading more contemporary books, which at the end of March I wasn't sure if I was, but now I definitely am at the end of June. So far in the first 6 months of the year I read 32 books for work, and then I read 21 classics and 47 contemporary books that were not for work, so I'm definitely reading more contemporary than classics. To explain the reasoning behind this goal, if it seems a bit weird for someone who really loves classics, I was aware that especially for the industry that I work in and working in publishing, it would be useful for me to read more contemporary books, and sometimes I did, and then sometimes I kind of got distracted by classics, and that meant I wasn't always keeping up with the market. And I do love classics and I do continue to read a lot of classics, and I want to continue to read a lot of classics. And I think by the end of the year, the balance will probably have slightly shifted because I do have Jane Austen July and Victober to go, both of which will involve lots of reading of classics. So we'll see how this ends up at the end of the year. Another of my reading goals for 2019 was to read books from my TBR jar. The idea was for me to pick 2 books out of this every month that I would read. That hasn't gone so well. So far in 2019 I have read 4 books that I pulled from this jar. I should at this point have read 12, so you know, I would like to do better on this in the second half of the year, especially because I would like to read more of the books on my shelf, but more onto that in a second. I haven't done that well so far this year in reading books that I own. So back at the end of March, in my last quarterly goals update, I admitted that out of the 50 books I had read in the first quarter of 2019, I had only actually owned physical copies of 7 of those books. I haven't done so badly going forwards. Now, out of the 100 books I've read so far this year, I own physical copies of 27 of them, which isn't great, but is better. I should say though that because I read probably at least 2 audiobooks a month, and I also read probably 4 or 5 books a month for work. Obviously all of those are books that I don't own physical copies of, which take up quite like a big chunk of that, and I do also get books out of the library quite a lot. I would like to get that number up to a third though. I would like a third of the books I read to be books that I own physically, which is possibly doable by the end of the year, although we do have Victober coming up and I only own 1 Victorian book that I haven't read yet, so that may be a month that is full of ebooks and books from the libraries. Another of my reading goals for 2019 was to participate in the Reading Through the Ages challenge. This is hosted by Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventures and Victoria from Eve's Alexandria. I'll link their channels and more information about it down below. And there is a bingo card like this, which I have been ticking off as I read historical fiction books which are set in the period listed on the bingo card. So at the end of March I had 6 squares ticked off, and now at the end of June I have 10 squares ticked off. So yeah, really enjoying participating in this. Another one of my goals for the year was my authors I want to read more by list. Back in Vlogmas I came up with a list of authors who I wanted to read more by, and I've been trying to read some more books by these authors. So I have now read books by 6 of the authors on that list, which is great because my plan for the year was to read at least 12 authors on that list, so I am exactly halfway through. So I read books by 2 of them, Ian Forster and Sarah Waters, back in the first 3 months of the year. And then in the last few months I picked up Slade House by David Mitchell, Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury, The Bedlam Stacks by Natasha Pulley, and A Long Long Way by Sebastian Barry, all of whom were authors I wanted to read more by. I enjoyed all of these books, especially The Bedlam Stacks, which was amazing. Interesting though, I would say that all of these books I didn't love quite as much as the book I had read by those authors previously, although The Bedlam Stacks was pretty close to my love for The Watchmaker of Filigree Street. It was amazing. But Slade House is not as amazing as Cloud Atlas, Dandelion Wine for me was not quite as astounding as Fahrenheit 451, and A Long Long Way was not for me a patch on Days Without End, though I still really enjoyed it, so yeah. That was interesting too. And then one of my big kind of reading projects for 2019 was my Trollope project, where I read a book by Anthony Trollope every month, which I still have been continuing to do. So I have read 6 books by Anthony Trollope now this year. So the books I read in April, May and June were Miss Mackenzie, Phineas Redu and Is He Popenjoy. I enjoyed all of these. Interestingly, I've read 6 Anthony Trollope books so far this year and not a single one has been a 5-star read for me. Though previously I have given a lot of Anthony Trollope books 5 stars. And I can't work out if this is because I'm reading slightly lesser well-known Anthony Trollope books, which are maybe lesser well-known for a reason, or because I've been reading a lot of the Palitzer series and I'm just I am enjoying the Palitzer novels, but I'm just not enjoying it as much as the Barsetshire Chronicles. And I think I was thinking it would be another Barsetshire Chronicles, and because it's not another Barsetshire Chronicles, therefore that makes me therefore I struggle with it all the more. Or it could be because I'm reading lots of Anthony Trollope, I'm less in awe of his writing style as I have been in the past. If I read an Anthony Trollope book every 6 months, I'm like, oh, I love his writing so much, it's so great, it's so rich and funny and lovely and really, really enjoy it. Whereas if I read a Trollope book every month, maybe I don't appreciate it in the same way. So I am enjoying the Trollope project. I am going to continue to do it for the rest of the year, but I'm not sure if it is necessarily the best way to read Trollope. But he also has so many books and I want to read more of them, and it seems like a sensible way of doing it. And I do want to read the Palitzer series all quite close together, and I've got a few of them left, so anyway. The 3 books I read for the Trollope project in the last few months, like I said, the first one was Miss Mackenzie. This tells the story of a woman in her mid-30s who has lived a very sort of quiet and secluded life, and suddenly she inherits a lot of money that she didn't expect to inherit, and suddenly this kind of catapults her into a new life. And having been an old maid by Victorian standards for a long time, suddenly a lot of people want to marry her and she doesn't really know what to do with this. I really enjoyed this one. It is quite quiet in a way. It's not one of the Trollope novels that hits you in the face with its amazingness, but it is really fantastic and subtle and really powerful as well. And I found Miss Mackenzie such an interesting character and quite an unusual main character for a Victorian novel as well. Then there was Phineas Redu. This is the 4th book in the Palitzer series and follows a character who we also encountered in the 2nd book, Phineas Finn. There's not too much I can say about the plot of this because it is a direct sequel to Phineas Finn, and to explain what happens in Phineas Redu would be to spoil what happens in Phineas Finn. But basically it follows our character, Phineas Finn, in various political and other situations. I was not a huge fan of Phineas Redu. It's definitely my least favourite Trollope of the year. It might be my least favourite Trollope ever, which is not to say that I really dislike it, because I love Anthony Trollope's writing style so much, and there was a point in this book, in the 3rd quarter of the book, that was fantastic, but so much of the stuff around it, I just don't love Phineas Finn that much, and I enjoyed him in Phineas Finn, but in Phineas Redu, I I kind of had enough of him. Like, one book of Phineas Finn was enough. I found it took quite a while to get going, and I didn't especially love the ending, and although I still really enjoyed Trollope's writing style and his vivid characterisation, it just wasn't my favourite Anthony Trollope at all. But there we go. Then there was Is He Poppinjoy, which is one of my favourite Trollopes so far this year, though not quite a 5-star, like I said, but I feel like it was a 5-star until about 3/4 of the way through. So this follows a woman called Mary and her husband George, and shortly after they get married, George discovers that his elder brother is also about to get married, or actually possibly maybe has already been married for 2 years and may have a child who may or may not be illegitimate and may or may not be now due to inherit the estate and the titles of the family instead of George. So the little boy, who may or may not be illegitimate, if he is legitimate, he is Lord Poppinjoy, that is his title, hence the slightly weird title of the book. So the book basically looks at the relationship between George and Mary, as husband and wife, who are both like they like each other and they get on and they do sort of love each other, but they're not really passionately in love with each other, and they have quite a complicated, tense relationship. And that aspect of the book I thought was fantastically done, and like just everything I love in Trollope. What Trollope does best, writing about messy marriages. Like, it was just fantastic, and I loved that so much. But I found the last quarter of the book a little bit slow, and there was one subplot that kind of came at the very end and then was just done, and I didn't really know why it was there. So this is a book that I really loved, but I thought was a bit flawed, and especially the ending did drag a little bit. Though maybe this is one that, because the rest of it was so strong, like, maybe on reflection I will look back on this slightly more fondly, because I think the ending slightly soured it for me, because I felt like it was about to end and then there were just like another 200 pages. But at the same time, it does do so many things so well, so I would definitely recommend Is He Poppinjoy, and yeah, I think that's probably my favourite Trollope so far this year. But now I have finished going through my main goals, I want to show you my glorious spreadsheet, which I'm greatly still enjoying filling out. So I talked about this a little bit in my last quarterly goals video. Basically, because my goals for 2019 included a few things that I was to like read every month, I decided to make myself a little like spreadsheet where I could tick things off when I'd read them, including my Anthony Trollope project and my authors to read more by books, or my TBR jar. And then I started thinking about what like my ideal reading month would look like, and I started adding like lots of other things to it, as you can see. The idea being that I wouldn't necessarily tick off every single thing every month, but that I would try to tick off quite a lot of them every month, and that then I would like know I'd had quite a nice reading month, and so I could know what like areas of my reading I was neglecting or not, I suppose. I've been really enjoying doing this, partly just because it's quite nice to have a thing on my fridge that I can like tick off. It's like when you mark a book finished on Goodreads, it's just like an extra thing to give you a little sense of achievement, I guess, which has been fun. And yeah, I feel like April, May and June have been quite good for these. In April I ticked off all but one of my challenges, shall we say. In May I ticked off 6 out of the 10, which is fine, and in June I ticked off 8 out of the 10, so also I'm very happy with that. And there's been, yeah, some areas that I've read lots of in the last few months and some areas which I've read less of, and I'm sure as I go through the rest of the year this will change. I imagine like my July and October reading, because I'm doing Jane Austen July and Victober, will be a bit different, and I won't necessarily have everything ticked off. Although in July I might read, I'm not just going to read Jane Austen related things in July, whereas in October I am going to just read Victorian literature. So yes, my first thing on the reading chart is my Trollope project book, which, as I said, I read one of in April, May and June. The next is my authors to read more by challenge, which I read 2 of in April and 2 of in May and none in June. So back in April that was David Mitchell and Ray Bradbury, and in May that was Natasha Pulley and Sebastian Barry. Then my Victorian long-term TBR book, so this wasn't in my original goals video, but I did make a video last October with like a long list of books that are on my long-term Victorian TBR, Victorian literature that I really want to read at some point or another. So I decided to include this as like a monthly challenge, though I haven't done very much Victorian reading in the last few months, to be honest, apart from Anthony Trollope. So I have ticked off it for June because I read a book by Frances Milton Trollope called Widow Barnaby, although Widow Barnaby itself was not on my long-term Victorian TBR, but Frances Trollope was as an author. So yes, I haven't read very many Victorian books apart from Anthony Trollope in the last few months, so not doing so well on that, but that's fine. To be honest, like when it comes to October, there will be a little tick by that box and like a times 10, so I will still have read many books from that long-term Victorian TBR by the end of the year. My TBR jar pick has been okay. I read Brother of the More Famous Jack by Barbara Trapido back in April, which is a book I picked out of my TBR jar, which I did not really enjoy and would not recommend. And then I didn't read anything out of my TBR jar in May, and then in June I read All Is Song by Samantha Harvey, which I really enjoyed and looks at the relationship between two brothers. I then have done a buddy read every month in April, May and June. definitely doing a lot of buddy reads so far this year, which has been really nice. Next is my like review copy challenge. I get sent quite a lot of books to review and I try to read as many as possible, but I'm not very good at reading them promptly always. But I have read 2 in the last couple of months, which is something. I read The Girl Aquarium by Jen Campbell back in April, and then I read The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary back in June, and both of those were books that have been sent to me by the publishers, both of which I really enjoyed and would highly recommend. When it comes to reading through the ages, I read 2 books back in April. The Wonder by Emma Donoghue, which is set in Victorian Ireland, so kind of for that challenge, and All the Lives We Never Lived by Anuradha Roy, which counted for the India during the British Raj challenge. And then in May I read Now We Should Be Entirely Free by Andrew Miller, which counted for the Napoleonic Wars challenge. These 3 books were all amazing. I gave them all 5 stars, they were all fantastic, and The Wonder especially is possibly my favourite book of the year so far, possibly joint with Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. Quite how I have gone from having 6 things ticked off to 10 things ticked off on my bingo card when I only read 3 books for this challenge in the last 3 months, I don't know. I think I must have ticked something off retrospectively. Next on my checklist is Japanese fiction, and I did read a Japanese book in April, May and June. In June I read Territory of Light, in May I read A Cat, a Man and 2 Women, and in April I read Slow Boat. All of these were a bit weird but good at the same time. Next on my list is Backlist Zaffa book. So Zaffa, like I said, is where I work, and while I am always doing lots of reading of frontlist books for work, there's also like a long and extensive backlist, which I have been working my way through a little bit. I think this will like ease off slightly in the rest of the year because when I started there was like a lot of books that I had to catch up on that had come out really recently, and I was working with the authors on like the paperback edition or kind of post-publication stuff, but I haven't read them yet, and so therefore I wanted to read lots of the backlist to catch up, whereas now I've read like most of the very recent backlist. I will go further back and there are other books that I want to read that we've published in the past, but this challenge I think can take a little bit of a backseat for the rest of the year because I've kind of caught up to a reasonable amount now. And finally I just have like a free choice challenge because it's nice to have something else to tick off every month, and also because I wouldn't want my month's reading to be prescribed by just these things and me to read nothing else. I can tick off that every month because there's always something random I read every month. And yeah, we have it. That's how my reading goals are going for 2019. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I feel like it's always a bit like rambly when I make one of these things, and I feel like this has probably been quite a long one, but I enjoy going through my spreadsheet and my numbers and all of those things because I always find it quite fun to see how I'm getting on. And I like to tick things off and so on, so that's exciting. Do let me know down in the comments how your 2019 reading goals are going if you have any. And that's all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.